Welcome to GardenDC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Gents. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 167 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we chat with Jana Milbocker, the garden tourist, all about the recent fling tours of gardens in the greater Philadelphia, Pennsylvania region. The plant profile is on Jujube, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on Cooking with Apples by Christy Page at the Food Gardening Network. This episode, we're joined by Jana Milbocker. She is an avid gardener, garden designer, author, and speaker in the Metro Boston, Massachusetts area. Welcome, Jana.
Hi, Kathy. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to share this podcast with you.
Thank you for agreeing to be a guest. And we spent some time this past weekend at the what's now called GB Fling or Garden Bloggers Fling, touring some amazing gardens in the Philadelphia area. So we're going to talk about those gardens we saw and our experiences at the Fling. But before we get into all of that good stuff, we always ask our guests here at the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb, or did that come later in life?
Well, I guess in a way it's a combination of both. I do have some garden genes in my background because my dad's side of the family was three generations of vegetable farmers in the Czech Republic. But I did not live there very long. We emigrated here, and neither one of my parents really inherited that gene. So I came to gardening really kind of later as a teenager, and then mostly in my 20s. I was really fortunate that we moved, when I was 13, we moved next door to the Fuss family in Connecticut. And Donna Fuss was a real she had become an avid gardener as a stay-at-home mom, and she was particularly interested in roses. And over time, she and her husband Mike became rosarians. They entered rose shows. They had a lovely rose garden on their property. And eventually, Donna became consulting rosarian to the Elizabeth Park Rose Garden in Connecticut. So I really feel that she was a very enthusiastic person. Loved to share her knowledge of plants, and I really feel that she was very influential to me as a gardener. And then I really didn't begin gardening until I was in my 20s, and we were living in the city, had a very long porch on the back of our apartment, and I started to want to just decorate it for the summer season with plants. And before you knew it, there was hardly any room to sit on the porch because it was just filled with annuals and hibiscus and roses and peonies that I was trying to all grow in pots and then overwinter indoors. So that's kind of how I got started with gardening.
And then what made you pursue it as a profession?
Well, once we moved to our house, which was just over 30 years ago, I really became an avid gardener. I became very passionate about gardening as a hobby, and I started taking courses. I joined gardening organizations, and about 12 years ago, I decided to transition my career from being a graphic designer and marketing consultant to doing garden design for primarily residential customers. And so I really made my newfound hobby and my love of gardening into my second career. And at that time, I also began speaking to garden groups and then eventually writing the books as well.
Hmm. And let's talk about a little bit about your books and the content and why you wrote them.
Sure. So my books are basically garden travel guides. I found as I was giving lectures to garden clubs here in Massachusetts that many of the local folks really didn't know about gardens outside of Massachusetts, and there are so many wonderful places to visit in New England, and then further afield in the Northeast, really, and in all parts of the country. And so it first became a lecture that I was giving about gardens in the Northeast, going basically from Maine down to Philadelphia. And then it was a very popular lecture. And so I decided to create a travel guide to those gardens. There wasn't really anything out there. And it really has become kind of a popular guide. And then I kind of went from there. Focused my second guide just on the New England gardens because there were so many that I wanted to feature. And then I wrote a book about Florida.
Hmm. And you're working on another one now.
Yes, yes. The one I'm currently working on is to the Mid-Atlantic area, and so that's going to be New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, as well as Delaware. And so I've been to all of the gardens, and I was really happy that the Garden Bloggers Fling was happening in that area, just so I could go back to some of those gardens and also discover some other new private gardens that I did not know. So it was a great opportunity to revisit the area and to also expand my knowledge of the private gardens there.
Mhm. Yeah, I loved revisiting some of the old favorites and some of the new discoveries that we'll be talking about. And before we turn our discussion fully over to the fling, uh, our listeners like to know about your own garden. Like, what do you grow now at home, and what plants are you passionate about?
Yeah, so I live about a half an hour west of Boston, and the property is about just over an acre and a half. The house is about 100 years old. So when we first moved in, there were a lot of very mature shade trees. Unfortunately, many of them were Norway maples and Norway spruce and other trees that can be kind of difficult to garden with. But I began with a passion for perennials and annuals and roses, and over time that of course expanded. I think that's sort of a way that many gardeners begin. They start with the annuals because they want colorful flowers in the summer. Then they kind of become interested in perennials, and then finally shrubs and trees. So I kind of took that route as well, and as far as the gardens that I have now, I would say they're a real mix of all those different types of plants. I have, I've gone through many phases of collecting, like many gardeners do. One of my loves, for instance, is hellebores. So I have quite a few hellebores on my property. I love peonies, so I have a lot of peonies. Um, I joined the Rhododendron Society recently, so I am starting to add more unusual rhododendrons to my garden. But it's really a blend. I do have a mix of both sun and shade, and it's a very flat property. With a lot of quite a bit of open space, there's no woodland or anything like that. So I really have a lot of space to garden in. And then in the last few years, I've also become a lot more interested in edibles again. And so I added some fruit trees, pears, Chinese pears, apples, mulberry tree, and a few different things, peaches and apricots as well. And then I've really expanded my vegetable garden as well. So there's kind of a little bit of everything, I would say, on my property.
Yeah, and with an acre, it sounds like you have room for all of that.
Yes, yeah. And there's also a small pond, and I'm really enjoying trying out different water lilies in the pond. It's kind of a blend of all different, I love a lot of different shade perennials, spring ephemerals,
Hmm.
as well as the sun-loving perennials that I mentioned earlier, and climbers. I love
Mm.
clematis. I've been collecting those as well. So lots of different types of plants. It's really kind of an experimental place for me. As a garden designer, I really try to recommend plants to others that I have grown myself. So a lot of plants I really like to just trial in my own garden and see how they perform in Massachusetts, and then I can recommend them to others and include them in my designs.
Hmm. And so, what is your zone and what's your soil like?
Well, I would say I think we're classified now as 6A, used to
Hmm.
be 5B. And I would say I sort of have average, kind of average soil. Of course, all of New England has quite a bit of stone. So you really can't dig a hole without coming upon fieldstone. So there's that. But it's kind of average. It's not too wet. It's not too dry, and I think partly because it's an old property, it's kind of the soil has not been used for gardening, but it's kind of average garden soil, I would say.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of us in the Mid Atlantic can definitely relate to that, except for, some of us have rocky soil, but most of us will have clay, or sandy soil, depending on what side of the coastal plain or Piedmont you're in. And you named two groups of plants that I just want to touch on really quick because I work with the International Water Gardening Society. I'm happy that you're collecting water lilies. And you mentioned the Rhododendron Society, and I work with the Azalea Society. So I'm going to like put a plug in to add a few more azaleas if you can squeeze them in.
Oh, sure, sure. And that's I love plant societies because that's really where you can learn so much about a particular type of plant. I did not join the rhododendron society because I was an expert in rhododendrons. I joined because I wanted to learn from other
Hmm.
experts there, and it's really been a wonderful opportunity for me to really be surrounded by people that are passionate about those plants, and people that breed them and create interesting new hybrids. So I
Hmm.
definitely would recommend membership in a plant society because I feel like you gain so much from that.
I agree. And it's by no means, like you said, you don't have to be a collector already or an expert. You're going to get access to plants you can't get anywhere else,
Exactly.
and new breeding and information. And just because it's called, say, a Rose Society or a Clematis Society, they're going to be passionate about all plants. Nobody just has just one kind of plant in their garden, right?
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. So you really get, and they're just such knowledgeable people. So it's just been a fabulous experience. So I definitely recommend it.
Hmm. Yeah, plants people are the best people.
Yes.
So, saying that, let's turn to our long weekend in the Philadelphia region with the Fling. And it was previously known as the Garden Bloggers Fling. It is rebranded to just the Fling now. And the tagline is bringing garden social media together. So it used to be that until a couple years ago, you had to have a blog that was active for at least 6 months prior to the fling that happened that year to be able to participate. And by active, I think it was a certain amount of posts in that 6 months or so period. And then now I think it's expanded to if you have an Instagram or a TikTok or a YouTube focused on gardening, then you would qualify to attend the fling.
Yes, and it was my first garden bloggers fling, or the fling, and it was just a really wonderful experience. There were about 100 of us there from all parts of the country, as well as Australia and England and Canada, and really just a really warm group of very friendly and also very knowledgeable folks. And I really, really enjoyed meeting everyone and just sharing stories about our own gardens, about how we got into gardening, and what we do professionally. So it was really a wonderful experience.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think this was my fourth fling. I'd done Madison, Wisconsin, Denver, Colorado, and then the fling was in the Washington, D.C. region. I think it was about 5 years ago now. And I don't know for sure that this is the 15th fling. I don't remember which number fling this is. But there are a lot of people who go every year. Like, this is their
Yes,
vacation, this is their connection to their plant friends. It started off as a group of garden bloggers who were corresponding on each other's blogs or commenting on each other's blogs, and then decided we want to get together for the weekend of seeing gardens in Austin, Texas. And Pam Pennick is the person behind that, who put that together for the first one. And it was so popular that it has grown and grown.
sure.
So this one was about 100 people. I would say what was funny to me about this year's Yana was that it was, I think, 95 female and a few males
Right,
sprinkled
right,
in.
exactly.
Yeah, so it usually is more couples, and there's some blogs and things that are done as couples, and there's certainly a lot of male social media garden influencers, but only a few were in attendance. But it was still, it was interesting just to observe that.
Sure, sure.
And so our first stop of our first day was at Longwood Gardens. And so we arrived around a little after noon. And they took us first to Longwood Gardens production facility side, where we picked up our name badges. And they gave us a behind the scenes, really quick tour of that newish production facility that's only been around for a couple years. And it was a state of the art greenhouse. I was very impressed, Yana.
Oh, I was too. And I've gone to Longwood Gardens many times. So this was a real treat for me to see behind the scenes how they everything from the way that they pot their plants to the way that they trim the bonsai. Or the way that they make those wonderful hanging baskets that are just huge, and really those greenhouses are just so custom tailored to their displays. It was really fascinating to see how they were able to customize all the machinery, and really it was incredibly impressive what they were able to do.
Mhm. And because of the timing we were there, we got to see the mum show. The chrysanthemums were
Yeah.
just starting to be transitioned to the conservatory at Longwood. So they were having a succession of the mums that would be in bloom over several weeks. And a lot of them were in topiary style or spider forms, or the single mums that have the huge head. And that was just fascinating to learn about how some of that is done. I don't know if your group, Yana, that you were in, we were split into groups of about 10 or so. The guy who was in charge of the mums talked about how he kind of massaged the stems. Because to me, I don't know about you, Yana, but when you bring home a pot of mums from the store, like the supermarket, those branches snap off in a hot second.
Right.
like
Right.
and I was looking at these topiaries and the way they're trained, and I was like, they seem so brittle. But he basically was saying they stop watering them for a couple days,
Hmm.
and then they warm up their hands, and then they kind of massage the stem and break the interior, like kind of like
Yes, that's
massage
right.
it back and forth.
Right.
The interior cells break, but not the outside cells break. And I was like, what? That blew my mind.
Yes. Well, the I've been to the chrysanthemum show a couple of times, but I just had no idea what went into creating these plants and the topiaries. So it was really fascinating to me. Jason, who's the person in charge of those mums, I guess he's been doing it for about 20 years now, and it was just they had so many different types of topiaries and cascading mums that some of them were going to be wrapped around giant columns within the conservatory. Others were going to be made into the giant globes. So it was really just fascinating to see what they need to do. I mean, basically, it takes a year for them to grow the mums and get them ready for their October installation. And just the technical knowledge involved and all of the like, daily care that goes into training them and you know some of them need to have their side branches taken off to create those perfect, tall, large-headed flowers. Others, of course, you're doing something completely different. You're removing buds, or there's just so much that goes into it. It was really fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we can do the whole hour just on that, but we have so many gardens to go
Yeah,
through. I'm like, I feel like we're going to have short shrift to some of these other things we saw at the greenhouses, including that amazing bonsai collection that they have going, and
yes,
how they were gifted. A local Kennett Square gardener gave him his world-class collection, and then Tim at the water garden showed us the amazing Victoria water lily pads and
yes,
talked about water gardening. He did such a great job. He's such a wonderful, huge personality. And because of the construction happening now at the Longwood Conservatory, all the water gardening, those big, beautiful water lilies and lotus and all of that, has been moved to the production facility. So if you go to Longwood now, you won't see those Victoria water lily currently.
right, right. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to when they finish construction. And there will be incredible new water gardens surrounding new conservatories that are being built right now. So
Hmm.
I'm really looking forward to how that's going to turn out. The water lily collection there has really been one of my favorite attractions when you visit in the summer, because there are just so many different types of water lilies that they raise there. And I especially love the Victoria water lily that we were looking at, with that grows. It can have leaves that are 10 feet in diameter, and they're just fascinating plants. And Longwood is actually really well known for hybridizing those water lilies. So I can't wait to see those back in the garden. And hopefully it will be either next year or the year after, I believe, that
Hmm.
will be completed.
Yeah, so after we went from the production facility, they took us to the main Longwood and then sat us down in the auditorium for a little bit to talk about those new conservatory plans and some of the build out they're doing. And then they released us into the garden. So we had a few hours to run around and take pictures and experience Longwood at its finest. It was a beautiful day that day.
That was a gorgeous day. Yes. I love being at Longwood. Late in the season like that, because that is really when you visit the flower walk, that's several hundred feet long and is kind of one of the original parts of the garden. That's really at its prime right now, because
Hmm.
it's filled with annuals and tropicals that have reached their mature height, and they're all in just in beautiful bloom, with colors that kind of they start with blue at the beginning of the walk, and then they go towards maroon and red, and then orange, yellow, and finally white. So that's really when that flower walk is at its glory. So it was great to see it there in September.
Hmm. Yeah, always great all times of year, especially in spring with the bulbs. But now when
Yeah,
it's mature at the end of summer, it's so full and gorgeous. And then they treated us to dinner in the beer tent. So
yeah,
kind of German themed dinner, and then to the fountain show. And our evening was the music of the ballet, I think, of Romeo and Juliet.
yes, yes. It was just stunning. I had never seen a whole show at night. I had just seen bits and pieces of one. So this was just it was just amazing.
Hmm.
Uh, just
Yeah,
a,
I would say you don't need to be a gardener. Like that part of that aspect of Longwood Gardens is something that everybody should
right,
experience.
right, for sure.
Hmm. And so that was a long and full and wonderful day at Longwood. And we have to thank Carl Gercens, who was a previous guest on this podcast, who organized the fling this year. He did such a wonderful job, and he's with Longwood Gardens.
Yes, yeah. I thought Carl did an amazing job putting together a wonderful itinerary for us. And and also just kind of giving us little previews even before the fling happened of some of the gardens that we would be seeing. He really, I think, generated a lot of excitement for the event, and definitely did not disappoint.
Hmm. And stayed flexible because as the weekend went on, we had the storm, what do we call it? Tropical storm Ophelia
Right,
move
right.
in. So our first 2 days were beautiful weather. And then Saturday and Sunday, we had on and off rain. But, we're gardeners, we're hardy.
We're used to that.
Yeah.
You have to be.
Yep. So our second day started off early with a pickup at 8 a.m. and half of us went to Andrew Bunting's Belvedere and half of us went to Charles Crescen's Hedgley Spring.
Yeah,
Did you start with Andrew Bunting?
I did. I
Okay.
did.
So you were on the same bus as me then. So
Yeah.
Andrew's been a past guest also on the Garden DC podcast a few times. So it was such a pleasure for me to actually get to see his home garden for once. And what did you think of it?
Well, I thought it was great. It was a real plant collector's garden. He had transformed his front yard into a gravel garden, which was really very unusual. With the gravel garden had a patio, a central patio, a beautiful pot of these giant elephant ears anchoring
Mm-hmm.
it, and it was just very unique. So that was just the beginning, and then you
Mm-hmm.
stepped inside, and there were just so many different types of plants. And one of the things that I really took away from those all of the Philadelphia area gardens were how many tropical plants they use as ornamentals throughout the garden that really that are particularly effective in the late part of the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I think a lot of gardeners kind of garden for June and July for the color that you get from the perennials, and then the garden can get a little flat later in the season. But if you use tropicals, they're at their showiest, late in the season in September, late August and September. So that's really what I saw in many of these gardens.
Hmm. Yeah, I noticed that so many had the hardy banana
Yes.
and
Oh,
yeah, and those big, big, big alocasia, colocasias, usually in a pot. Maybe they were
right.
bringing those in.
Right. Cannas, a lot of really large cannas,
Hmm.
and many beautiful dahlias too. So a lot of great tropical plants, which of course, can't stay outside for the winter, but they definitely just add a lot of drama to the garden.
Hmm. And so from Andrews, we went to Charles Crescent, Hedgley Spring. These are both private gardens in Swarthmore. They've opened their gardens in the past to groups or garden clubs or for like open gardens for the Garden Conservancy, but these would be by permission only, these two gardens.
That's right.
What was your impression of Charles's garden?
Um, well, of course, every garden has its own surprises. One of my favorite things that I saw there was a pomegranate tree,
Hmm.
fairly large in size, with many pomegranates on it. So I don't think I'd ever been to a garden that had pomegranate fruits. So
Hmm.
that was really fun. And then he also had some wonderful passion flowers and the passion fruits. Um, this was a garden that really had a nice combination of edibles as well as ornamental plants. A big vegetable garden as well. And just beautiful, unusual flowering plants. There were alströmerias there. There were just gorgeous anemones in bloom at this time. Just many, many lovely plants.
And lots of little bulbs I saw
Yeah,
tucked everywhere.
yes, I saw that
Hmm.
as well.
Hmm.
And I was going to mention those later when we talk about the cyclamen collection. That
Oh
was
yeah, we'll
really good.
get to that in a minute. But yeah,
Yeah,
I think a lot of these people are similar plant collectors of some of those tiny little bulbs, especially that
right.
are winter and fall blooming.
Yes.
So we got back on the bus and then we went to Michael and Simple's Create a Scene in Malvern, PA. And Create a Scene is the name of I think their landscaping business or design business.
Right.
And that's partially open to the public. How I guess you could describe maybe certain days they're open to the public.
Yeah, and that was again, it was a very creative garden. A lot of really fun accents, statuary, seating, just a lot of fun accents. Some wonderful seating area right across from the house that had couches and tables and chairs inside of a pergola, and it was bordered by a pond on one side. And then, of course, they also had a fabulous two-story greenhouse in the back of the property, and that was a real treat. Lots of beautiful orchids there, palm trees, and other blooming tropicals. So that was really fun to see.
Hmm. And this was the garden that I think was most similar to my style in that there's no rhyme and reason for a lot of stuff in their garden. There's just they just stick it all in where they can. There's a lot of like garden whimsy
Yeah,
and statuary. They look like they collect gargoyles. And
right, right.
Simple makes a lot of things. He had these metal cats he was making and different structures that they were using and selling. So it was kind of a, I don't want to call it a mishmash kind of garden, but definitely eclectic.
Eclectic, yeah, with a lot of whimsy. Exactly.
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of their personality, and you could tell they love plants.
Yes.
Um, then we moved on to, and I'm going to probably butcher her name. Quick lunch at Wegmans. Then we went to Carol Verhacke,
Yeah.
um, Lasting Landscapes in Berwyn, PA. Again, another private garden of a garden designer.
Yes. Yes. And there, I loved when we walked up to her house. I loved the foundation plantings that Carol had planted. It was combination of hydrangeas and beautiful glossy abelia. Now, abelia is not
Hmm.
grown as much here in Massachusetts as further down south. But the abelias were in full bloom, and they were just covered with pink flowers. Absolutely gorgeous.
Hmm.
So she had those. She had beautiful. They were bordered by white anemones. Um, it was really, it was just a very different garden from the one we had just been to. Much more of a kind of an organized garden, but a lot of great collections of plants.
Hmm. She had a lot of shade towards the back with
Yes,
some big mature trees, and this is like a big suburban lot,
right.
with like a kind of a low slung house, and she'd totally redone the house and gardens. And I love the before and after pictures. Thought
Yes,
those were
yeah, that was
great
a
to
great
see.
idea. Yes, she
Hmm.
had them placed throughout the garden so you could see what the transformation that had happened.
Yeah, like they were literally large photos mounted on a sign instead of
Right.
like a little book on a table that you might gather around. Like, and so you looked at the scene on the picture and you could see the transformation right in front of you.
Right, exactly. And she had divided the property into individual garden rooms almost.
Mhm.
And some of them, she had beautiful shade gardens. Of course, being a hellebore lover, I immediately focused on the hundreds of hellebores that were on one of the slopes in the
Mhm.
shade area. She had plants like Tricertus, which is one of my favorite fall bloomers, which was in blooming there. Hecone grasses, lots of different hostas.
Mhm.
So lots of different garden areas and island gardens throughout the backyard.
Mhm. And lots of good seating and a wonderful moon gate.
Yes,
Thought that
yeah,
was just stunning out of stone.
and a
And
pond.
and
Yeah,
a pond. Well,
yeah,
love those water features. And I do have to say now for our listeners, if you're like, what? Like, and trying to picture some of the things we're describing, you can look at my Instagram at WDC Gardener. You can also look at the many other Fling attendees who have posted their photos from these gardens in the last week or so. And you'll find them mainly on Instagram at hashtag GBFling23, and some people used hashtag GBFling 2023. So I would look under both hashtags in your search and you'll come up with hundreds of photos from these gardens to peruse.
yes, yep. And
And so I was going to say, Jana, that we ended the day Friday at Chanticleer, which is always a special treat.
it certainly is. That was the really the first garden that I visited in the Philadelphia area 10 years ago, and it's one that I make a point to visit at least once a year when I go back. Um, one of the most creative gardens that I have been to. Their plant combinations are just gorgeous. I would say the combinations that they come up with, as well as their container plantings,
Mm.
are absolutely just stunning.
Hmm. I love, can't say enough about Chanticleer.
Right,
Just
right.
like,
You can't.
yeah, I could go on and on. I think the gentians I took pictures of by the Ruins Garden are some of the best photos I've taken on a trip. They're just gorgeous. Maybe I'll feature them for a Flower Friday tomorrow. And the staff have done such a wonderful job with these creative seating throughout the
Yes,
garden. There's
yes.
always somewhere to sit and peruse and a great viewpoint.
And of course, the seating is made by the gardeners as well,
Mhm.
which is
Mhm.
just, they're every single piece is different and unusual, or everything from there are all different types of chairs, but then even just the wrought iron railings that they have made that are throughout the garden, water fountains, as well as the plant list boxes that are throughout. Every single one of them is special, unique design, and handmade by the gardeners on the property.
Mhm. And I think special and unique really encapsulates Chanticleer.
Yes. And one of my favorite things there this year, for this trip, were the autumn crocuses. I don't know if
Mhm.
you got to that part of the garden, but they just had hundreds of autumn crocuses naturalized in the lawn, and it was just gorgeous. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, this is my first
that's-
time going to the top of that and looking down that lawn.
right,
Usually I'd always be at the bottom looking up it, where
right.
it's kind of a lawn of, as you said, thousands of autumn crocus popping up. But this time I had the luxury of a little bit more time to run through the garden.
Right, right. Yeah, so that was, I think with that's the way it is with gardens. Each time you go, something different strikes you because you're noticing something different. You're there in a different month, or you're just sometimes just different plants come on your radar at different times. And right now, um, autumn crocuses are on my radar. I just put in my first autumn crocuses in my own garden, so I
Mhm.
really focused on those.
Mhm. And we were there for a few hours, and they also treated us to dinner and live music and dancing was
Yeah.
and that so that was an extra bonus treat on top of that. So that was Friday evening, a full and wonderful day. So Saturday morning, the rains came,
Yes.
and my first stop, and this is where we did a do-si do again, was at John Lonsdale's Edgewood. Did you
Yes,
start with
mine
that one?
too. Yes,
Okay.
mine too.
So we'll start with that, and then the other bus went to David Culp's garden. So we'll transfer back to that in a second. So John Lonsdale's Edgewood in Exton, PA. He has kind of a home nursery, and he does mail order and goes out to local festivals in the Mid Atlantic to sell his plant collection. So I'll let you, Jana, describe that plant collection and garden.
Sure. So, what we were seeing, I believe that he collects both snowdrops and hardy cyclamen. And of course, the snowdrops were all underground, but the hardy cyclamen were blooming in his greenhouses. And I've made several trips to the UK to look at gardens, and in September, and I would see these hardy cyclamen in many of the public gardens in Britain. So it was a real treat to see them really to see hundreds of different varieties in his greenhouses. John hybridizes cyclamens. They grow from a corm, basically. And if you were to buy them, uh, from a mail order nursery now, I mean, generally the corm is about the size of a chestnut, I would say. But what I didn't realize, we were seeing these large pots just filled with cyclamen flowers. And I come to find out that's really just one corm. The corm just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. So some of the corms that we were seeing in these pots were probably 10 inches in diameter. And, of course, the plants were about 25 years old at that point. Well, that was a real treat for me to visit those greenhouses and see hundreds of different cyclamens blooming.
Mhm. And we should say that this is just a home, regular house,
Right.
along a slope. So
Yes.
he has this kind of garden that goes up a berm. So that's
Right.
where all those little tiny galanthus, the
The snowdrop.
snowdrops are in for great drainage, and the cyclamen also have great woody drainage there too. And the greenhouses that we're describing are the size of I'm gonna say smaller than a box truck, each of them.
Right.
Yeah, so we're talking small greenhouses, and the cyclamen are tiny, so you can pack a lot in there.
Right. That's right. And John actually hybridizes for the leaves, not so much for the flowers. He's trying to get lots of different. Of course, cyclamens have beautiful patterned foliage, and so he's really hybridizing for the foliage.
Mhm,
So that was a real treat for me. Again, this is a plant collector with a real passion for specific types of plants. So that
mhm.
was great.
And he's made his passion his full-time job, which is amazing.
Yes.
And yeah, it's hard for me to focus on the foliage because we were just looking at all those tiny
Right.
flowers.
Right.
And also, we should say, in his British accent, I think he said cyclamen, and we're
Okay.
saying, I'm never going to say it's always going to be cyclamen to me too. So then the rain started to let up a little bit as we arrived at David Culp's garden, and that is the famous Brandywine Cottage in Downingtown, PA, which he does open up to garden groups and tours with previous arrangement, and has written a book or two about all the wonderful things in his garden. Was that your first visit there, Jana?
It was actually my second.
Okay.
I had been there a year ago in June.
Hmm.
And it's always a treat to see this garden because I have read both of his books. And they were they were both just wonderful books. Really took you through. The first one was basically a year in the garden, and it just took you through the seasons. And so it was a real treat. So I had seen the garden in June before, and now I was seeing it in September. So of course it was quite different. Again, many of the tropical plants in the borders really made those flower borders look totally different with their large foliage. And just everywhere you looked, there were just special little collections. There were little orchids in one area. I saw a clivia with striped foliage, which I had never seen anywhere before. So that was really fun. What were some of the things that you liked there, Kathy?
Well, I just like hanging out with David because
Well,
he's
that's it,
just
of course.
so wonderful. But yeah, I snuck in the back where he has his little Galanthus beds, his breeding beds in the back, and it was such a damp day, and he
Yes,
had gone through such a dry summer. So, there was a little bit of wear and tear because of both of that, because of the mud that day and the drain. But it was still such a beautiful garden despite all of that. And then David told me a little bit about a garden he's working on for the town, that will be a public garden and open to everyone, called the Gardens at Bondsville Mill. And
oh,
I think he said next spring they'll be having their official, like, real opening. I think they already did maybe a ribbon cutting and started planting, and you can already walk through it. But I'm definitely looking forward to coming back to David's garden and then now visiting that mill garden as well. He said it
yes,
will be predominantly natives, which his garden is not. Is a mix of everything, and of course the hellebores that he's bred, and the galanthus, of course, that he collects like a madman.
right,
So we didn't get to see those because we were a little early for those,
right.
which I'm kind of glad about that though.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then so we got back on the bus, and both buses headed over to Win Eden. And that's in Chadsford, PA, and that's a private garden that is a hosta collection, is one way
Yeah,
we can call it, but it's also way, way more than that.
exactly. And I was actually so excited to see this garden because a friend of mine had been there on when it was on tour for the National Hosta Society convention about 10 years ago, I guess. And she had pictures of it in her lecture about hostas. She's also a hosta collector. And so I remember vividly the picture of his garden slope, which goes from the house down to a pond. And it is landscaped with, I would say, about 15,000 hostas. And it looks like a river flowing down because the hostas are in different colors. So you get sort of this striation. So I was just so excited to see this garden in person.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I've used that same photo of that same slope of those curving hosta streams in my talks many times, and I had visited over 12 years ago, so I was so excited to see the expansion of his gardens to a
Yeah,
whole new area of his property, and to take photos of the hostas again and everything else on property. I mean, it is just amazing. And they do have their own website online, and it's Wyn Eden, WYN, and then Eden as in paradise, that has kind of a portfolio that you can go through and look at different aspects of his garden, especially if you're a hosta lover, but
right.
lover of
Hosta.
any gardens.
Really, the bamboo, a beautiful bamboo grove. I think he has three ponds on the property,
Hmm.
and woodland walks all around them. So it's just a real, very different kind of garden, kind of much more naturalistic than many of the others that we had seen up until that point. But
Hmm.
just lovely.
Yeah, you just feel like you're taking a long walk in an enchanted wood.
Yes,
Like
definitely.
it's more experiential type garden. So then we had a quick lunch at Wegmans again, and then we terrorized Terrain, um,
Right.
which is a renowned garden center slash nursery slash lifestyle store. So you got to hit that when you're in that area. And then both buses went on to Owl Creek Farm in Westchester, PA.
Another incredible stop. This was really, this property was a lot about flowers and a
Hmm.
lot about container gardening.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, we were told that they had over 80 containers throughout their gardens, and the gardens were just magnificent in many different ways, but the containers were filled with tropicals, annuals, perennials, and they were all grouped to create these vignettes throughout the garden and to
Hmm.
frame a lovely gravel patio in the back. So that was a real treat to me. For me, it was a very colorful garden,
Hmm.
and it was in a really interesting kind of a meadow surroundings because it had originally been, I believe it was a farm at one
Yep.
point, a little farmland, and then now some of that had been allowed to become a meadow, and so it was this lovely, colorful garden in the middle of a meadow.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's a private estate, and you kind of enter it through this winding road through that grassy meadow, tall meadows, and then the house is revealed to you with the kind of a surrounding garden. And I love they had a gated, fenced, like deer fenced off
Hmm.
vegetable garden. So I don't
Yeah.
know why, but I was like, I hadn't seen so many vegetable gardens during this trip, so I was spending a lot of time taking pictures in there too.
Well, I'm always fascinated what other vegetable gardeners do,
Hmm.
as far as how they grow their plants, what they use to trellis their plants on, how they keep the critters out. So it's always, I always appreciate visiting other vegetable gardens as well. And this one was gorgeous.
Hmm. Yeah, everything was, done to perfection. And I do like how the homeowner had come out and greeted us and told us that he was all about shrubs and trees from his nursery background as
Right.
a plantsman, with Connor Pyle and Star Roses, and he had a conifer collection there too. But his wife was the one who I think, added all those annual containers, and it is, the better for it. It's just an explosion, as you said, of color.
Yes, it is. It
Mhm.
was also a place where I saw pawpaw trees with
Mhm.
fruit. And of course, those are native, it's a native fruit tree here in the United States. And I've tried them, I've tried growing them a couple of times, but the deer got to them a couple of times. So I haven't had luck yet, but it's still on my radar, to add more of the pawpaws to my garden. So it was fun to see them there.
Mhm. And we finished that day at Stoneleigh, a natural garden. So we had a visit and dinner and then a presentation of next year's fling, which will be in the Seattle Puget Sound area.
Yes. And Stoneleigh was a real surprise for me too because I had seen it when it's really only been open to the public for about 5 years now,
Hmm.
and I saw it the first year that they opened, and it's a beautiful large property around. It's an estate with a mansion, and it had beautiful collection of trees. But they have added so many plantings in the past 5 years that it's kind of night and day to what I had seen before. So I was really just dumbstruck by how much it had changed in that short amount of time.
Hmm. And to me, it's like some of the most wonderful trees. The tree collection there is incredible. So if
Yes,
you love arboretums and old trees, and then underplantings with big swaths of native plants, that's the new additions. And
exactly.
then they share, the foundation there shares the space in the house with a organ collection, as in church organs that have been rescued from churches, I guess, throughout the country, and maybe some are there in the basement. So it's a funny juxtaposition,
Yes, yeah,
yeah. But the
yeah.
house is like circa, I think, 1920s Gilded Age type
Right,
house.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And to me, that was one of the really interesting things is to see this Gilded Age estate, but to see that the plantings are all native plants. So you've got this kind of this nice juxtaposition of the formality of the original layout of the garden and of the house, and then you've got sort of um, the informality of the plants themselves. Kind of a
Hmm.
really nice juxtaposition of the two. The plants really soften the formality of the house and of the lines of the garden.
Hmm. And because it is a fairly new public garden, it's not a lot of people's radar yet, but it'll be developed in the next 10 to 20 years. I think there'll be huge transitions to it.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Hmm. All
yeah,
right, so let's move on to our final day, Sunday, because it was pouring rain Sunday morning. There was a bit of a change. We were supposed to go to a couple private gardens, and we got switched instead to the nearby Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore on the college campus, and that's accessible to anybody. I mean, it's a college campus. You can
yeah.
just go in and walk around anytime.
And they have a fabulous rose garden there, and that's really what I had seen, what I'd mostly seen in the past,
Hmm.
along with their the famous amphitheater, which I think is one of the main, sort of the focal point of the gardens there. Sadly, that was kind of inaccessible to us at this time because they're doing a lot of construction on campus. But I really also enjoyed seeing all the different pocket gardens throughout the campus. It seemed like everywhere you turned, there was another little pocket garden. They had different themes. Some were shade gardens. There was an alley of cypresses, I believe. There was a stumpery,
Hmm.
which is an old type of garden that's kind of coming back to public gardens, particularly. So there's a lot to see on that campus.
Hmm. Yeah, the construction made things a little tough because, you had to get around buildings, and, a lot of campuses
Right.
are like mazes anyway, but you can stumble on some great little gardens. I love the teaching garden,
Yeah.
especially. That's
Yeah.
the highlight for me, of course, and that grass amphitheater
Yeah.
um, on that steep hillside is gorgeous. And then we went on to Jenny Rose Carey's Northview. garden for a visit and lunch.
Yes, and that was I loved seeing that garden as well. I believe she said it's 4.5 acres in size,
Mm,
but you feel like you're in a much bigger garden because it is truly divided into garden rooms. And in fact, many of the garden rooms had names, and they had like nice little painted signs telling you where you were. So it was everything from a little orchard and vegetable garden to pond area. There were several ponds throughout the area. There were children's play spaces, play kind of children's gardens throughout. There was just so much there. There was a
mhm.
lot there.
Yeah,
Um,
and she's been on the podcast before talking about shade gardening and also her color in the garden. So I love the way she has a blue and yellow garden. She has a pink garden.
right,
She has a purple garden. So they're kind of color thematic. They're not exclusive, but they
right,
give you an idea.
right, exactly, exactly. And those incredible structures that she had, the garden shed and another garden house. They were just to die for.
Yeah,
Every
who doesn't
every
love a
gardener's
she shed?
dream.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And
Beautifully organized and
mhm.
just there, especially on a rainy day, it was a real pleasure ducking in one of those and just sitting there for a few minutes and soaking it in.
Mhm. Yeah, she sheds are the best, especially when they're done so perfectly like hers are. And I was
Yeah,
also thinking of Andrew Bunting. He had a he shed,
he
if
said,
I can
yes.
if I can say that. That was really unique and I liked hanging out in that for a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Summer houses are just they are great additions to the garden.
mhm.
So if you have room to put something like that in, it's really worthwhile.
Definitely. Yeah, and it gives a little like cozy place for the gardener to kind of hide out from the world too.
Right.
And so our next stops, the buses split again, and half went to Mill Fleurs, Barbara Tiffany's garden in Pont Pleasant, and then Paxton Hill Farm. Which one did you go to first?
I went to Mill Fleur
Hmm.
first. And
So,
I had been there before, so it wasn't my first time. But that again is an amazing plant collector's garden. They Barbara has plants there really from all over the world,
mm,
and it's the site itself is very interesting because it was an old mill. So you've got the river there, and most of the gardens are really terraced on a hillside going down to the river. Um, so that in itself, was an interesting challenge to overcome when you, as a gardener, because these are steep hillsides,
hmm,
almost vertical. And then she created kind of themed planted areas as well, from a gold area like a gold garden to a variegated green and white garden, just lots of different types of themes throughout, and lots of rare plants that you wouldn't find in most nurseries.
hmm. Yeah, and she has a small little nursery at the top, kind of
Yes,
where you enter, that you can buy some propagation of some of those plants. But as you said, rare finds, some variegated things you won't find anywhere else. She's got some one of a kind stuff that's amazing. And I would call it a ravine garden. I mean, can't
right.
emphasize how tall that rock wall is and how steep it is down there. But she's got
Yes,
a little golf cart, so when she does bring groups in and you need assistance to get up and down that hill, you can jump on her golf cart with her.
right, right. And then the gardens are accented with this beautiful outdoor furniture that I guess she and her husband designed.
Hmm.
These lovely benches, wood benches that are really unique. So it's a place where you could really spend hours and hours just looking at all of the different plants and trying to figure out, where they came from, what part of the
Hmm.
world they came from.
And Barbara takes you through personally herself. She's a dynamo, and she
Yes.
gives you the stories behind these plants. And,
Right, right, which is a lot of fun. And her favorite
hmm,
color is purple. So there's a
hmm.
lot of purple in that garden. And she was dressed all in purple when we were there.
Yeah, she had purple umbrellas.
Yeah.
for her helpers who are helping people guide through the garden as well. And she always bakes cookies for you at the end, so always a treat. And yeah,
Yes.
she is I just consider her um, just an incredible plantswoman. She is just
Yes.
a phenomenon in her own. And then Paxton Hill Farm, not too far away in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and that is a nursery and a public garden. So you pay at the nursery desk to go in if you were to drive up and go on your own. And to me, Jana, that was the revelation of this whole weekend fling for me
Really?
because
Oh, okay.
for years I've been wanting to go to Paxton Hill. I just thought it was a nursery. I thought it was a place to buy cool plants. I had no idea of this garden that Bruce has developed there.
It's yeah, it again, it's a place that's divided into these really interesting garden rooms. But I think to me, these garden rooms, many of them are all about drama. They
Mhm.
have some kind of an interesting focal point, whether it's a fountain or a piece of sculpture, and then they're just kind of they're surrounded by plant material that really encloses them, and creates this individual space, and it's
Mhm.
acres and acres of gardens.
Yes, it just keeps going. And he opened up, and I hear this is rare, he opened up the private part of his estate for us. And I'm not sure that many of the flingers even had time to go into that part. But I talked to one of the nursery employees and he led us through to the private side, which I think maybe during a garden conservancy day he would open up that. And in future years, they said that will also be part of the public garden side and that he has a conifer collection, just
Right,
stunning,
right.
and this beautiful like dry stream bed, which was not so dry during our visit,
No, unfortunately.
but it did show you the great stormwater usage
Yes.
um, of that. And just had a cat jump on me to get a hug. Um, so yeah, Paxton Hill Farm, well worth the visit. And then we ended Sunday with a trip to Peddler's Village, which has some, street plantings and containers, but that was mainly for social shopping and dinner.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it was really an amazing itinerary. I mean, we were going from 8 in the morning until oftentimes 9:30 at night, and packing in 5 gardens a day. So it was really a wonderful packed itinerary.
Yeah, kudos again to the Fling board and to Carl for organizing. And we saw some amazing things and want to pass that on to the Garden DC listeners. And if you are ever in the Philadelphia area, I would highly recommend a stop at a few of these.
Definitely. And I'm just I can't wait to go again next year. I do go down to Philly at least a couple of times a year, so I'm looking forward to it again.
hmm So thank you so much, Jana, for sharing your impressions of your first time at the Fling and these Philadelphia area Mid-Atlantic gardens. And how about sharing with our listeners how they might contact you?
Oh, sure. Well, you can contact me several ways. My website is enchantedgardensdesign.com, and that's really kind of the easiest way to get a hold of me. But there's a contact page, and there's also information about lectures that I give, about my books, and about garden tours that I'm giving. I'm also on Instagram at the Garden Tourist. And I have two Facebook pages. One is called Enchanted Gardens, and the other is a group called Garden Tourists. And that's a group that you can join to learn about places to visit primarily and to share gardens that you have visited as well. Kathy, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It was a real pleasure, and I so enjoyed sharing the Garden Bloggers Fling with you. It was a great experience, and I'm really looking forward to going again next year in Washington State.
Thank you, Jana. You love listening to podcasts. Have you considered making your own podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since I discovered Spotify for Podcasters, I found it super easy to produce the GardenDC podcast. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Jujube plant profile. Jujube, Ziziphus jujube, is an attractive tree that produces edible fruits. It is also known as the Chinese date. Jujube trees are hardy to USDA zones 6 to 11. It is self-pollinating, so you only need one in your garden to be able to produce fruits, but a second tree of another variety nearby can produce larger yields. Try planting a Li near a Lang. They grow best in full sun and well-draining soils. They prefer a hot summer for the best fruit set. They can also be grown in containers. They are disease and pest-free for the most part. One warning, the tree does have thorns. Pruning is not necessary for the fruit production, but it is recommended in winter to shape the tree for ornamental purposes. Depending on the variety, Jujube can be round or oval. They have an apple-like taste and texture, with more of a berry-type flavor when they are fully ripe. At that point, they are red, soft, and wrinkly. You can store the dried fruits for up to a year. Jujube, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my sedum autumn joy is blooming, and that tells me fall is officially here. Over at the community garden plot, we have seedlings coming up from our radish and arugula, and hope to see the seeds also sprouting soon for our beets, our cilantro, and our spinach. In the local gardening world, a couple of events that you might want to attend in the Washington, D.C. area include the orchid auction of the National Capital Orchid Society, and that is being held Saturday, October 7th at the North Chevy Chase Christian Church on Kensington Branch Parkway in Chevy Chase, Maryland. The auction is open to the public and admission is free. You'll see a wide variety of species and hybrid orchids at the auction, and there will be award-winning best of plants, all cultivated and grown with great care by the NCOS members. Orchid plants and supplies will also be available for sale, and you can find out more about that at ncos.us. And the following day, Sunday, October 8th, in the afternoon from 2 to 4:30, is the Rosebush Auction and Rooting Workshop. It's a lively rosebush auction followed by a hands-on rooting workshop hosted by the Arlington Rose Foundation that is free for ARS members. Non-members have a fee of $18, and this is held at Columbia Gardens Cemetery off of Arlington Boulevard in Arlington, Virginia. Details are available at arlingtonrose.org. Happy gardening!
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with the new book Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional, everyday grass lawn. In the last 3 years alone, over 23 million American adults converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now are looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn is knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Author Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the details on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Available at bookstores now and also at Quarto.com, where you can get 30% off using discount code GARDENING30. In the new book, The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space while also making a lush outdoor living area you'll crave spending time in. Whether you're growing edible plants or beautiful flowers, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
This is the last word on Cooking with Apples by Christy Page of the Food Gardening Network. My absolute favorite thing to do every fall is to make an apple pie, or really just about anything with apples. After having fun apple picking, I get to put the fruits of my labor, pun totally intended, to good use. Over the years, I have perfected my apple pie recipe to the point where I don't even need to look up the instructions. It's all muscle memory. Now, this didn't happen all at once. It was truly a process. Years ago, I worked with an elderly woman who had Parkinson's. I was in college and took a part-time job as her companion. I spent my Saturdays taking her grocery shopping, helping her with odd projects around the house, and baking. She taught me her secret to the flakiest pie crust I have ever had. It's now the only recipe I'll use. To make an apple pie, I took hints and tips from my mother, my grandmother, and even Betty Crocker. Each year, I'd make one and tweak it just a little bit until I knew it was right. The year I knew it was perfect was actually my second year of marriage. After dragging my husband apple picking with me, I planned a day of baking. He went off fishing with a friend while I took over the kitchen. I decided to make 2 pies this year, and after a couple of hours of labor, they were cooling on the racks, and I ran out to do some errands. When I came home, I was happy to see that my husband was already there. I wasn't as happy once I walked through the door. Both he and his friend were sitting on the couch, each holding a pie pan and a fork. Both pies were just about completely gone. My husband told me it was good and very graciously offered me a bite. I may have seen red that day. Years later, I can laugh about it and know that that was the day that I knew my recipe was perfect. My husband has learned to only eat 1 slice at a time now. To me, it's not truly fall until my first apple pie is baking in the oven. My kids' favorite part is when I roll out the extra pie dough, cover it with butter, cinnamon, and sugar, and roll it up like a crescent roll. And then we bake it into something we like to call a cinnamon twist-up. I will admit to making extra pie dough to make sure we have enough to make these every single time. We have lots of healthy apple recipes as well. I love to make homemade applesauce with just a touch of cinnamon and nutmeg. Apple coffee cake that has just a tiny bit of sugar and relies on sweeter apples. Caramel apples, which may not be healthy but are so delicious, and so many more. Come to think of it, at least 50% of all my baking in a year comes in the fall and usually contains apples. I've even learned that you can freeze fresh apples to use in baking later, which is just perfect for a pie at Christmas. As soon as that first fall bite is in the air, I'm pulling out my recipes and planning my baking schedule. I just love this time of year. This was the last word on Cooking with Apples with Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to anchor.fm/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to washingtongardener.com. Thank you. You can find Washington Gardener online at washingtongardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.